Alright, let's talk about Africa. For the longest time, when the rest of the world thought about Africa, they pictured one of two things: lions from the Lion King or commercials with sad music asking for donations. But folks, things have changed. The continent is young, it's growing fast, and it's got a ton of the resources the world needs to run everything from your phone to those fancy new electric cars. Suddenly, everyone wants to be Africa's best friend. It's like the continent went through a major glow-up, and now its DMs are full. And leading the pack of new admirers are the two biggest kids on the global block, the United States and China. This isn't just a casual friendship, it's a full-on competition. It's like watching two superstars trying to sign the same talented artist to their record label. One is the established legend who has been around forever, and the other is the new, flashy sensation with a completely different style. The United States, the old-school champ, and China, the challenger with a big checkbook, are both rolling out the red carpet for African leaders. They are both promising the world, but their methods, their sales pitches, and their ultimate goals are worlds apart. This isn't just about politics. It's about business, influence, and shaping the future of the 21st century. The stage for this grand contest is a continent of over 50 countries, each with its own history, its own needs, and its own ambitions. It's not a single place, but a mosaic of vibrant, complex nations. And for them, this newfound attention is both a massive opportunity and a potential headache. It's like having two very rich, very persistent suitors. On one hand, you get a lot of free dinners and fancy gifts. On the other hand, you have to make sure they don't start a fight in your living room and break all your furniture. This rivalry is defining modern geopolitics, and its main arena is right across Africa. So forget the old tired narratives. The story of Africa today is a story of power, choice, and leverage. It's a high-stakes economic drama playing out in boardrooms in Beijing, Washington, D.C., and most importantly, in the capital cities from Cairo to Cape Town. African leaders are no longer just accepting what's offered. They're sitting at the negotiating table, weighing their options, and trying to figure out who can give them the best deal. This is the new Scramble for Africa, but this time, Africans are determined to be players in the game, not just the prize to be won. And trust me, it's a show you don't want to miss. When China shows up in Africa, it doesn't come with a long lecture and a list of conditions. It comes with a hard hat and a blueprint. The Chinese approach is incredibly straightforward. You need a road? We'll build it. You need a port? We'll build it. You need a soccer stadium? We'll build that too, and we'll do it fast. This strategy is called the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's basically China's global infrastructure master plan. For many African countries that have waited decades for development, this is music to their ears. They see tangible results: shiny new airports, smooth highways, and modern railways, appearing in a fraction of the time it would take with other partners. The secret to China's speed is its state-backed model. Chinese companies, funded by Chinese state banks, arrive with the money, the materials, and often their own labor. This cuts through a lot of the red tape that can slow projects down for years. They offer huge loans to get these massive projects off the ground. In 2023, for instance, they put up nearly $300 million for green energy projects in places like Madagascar and Uganda. And in 2024, they pledged a whopping $51 billion in new funding for the continent, promising to create 1 million jobs. For an African leader who needs to show their citizens progress before the next election, this is an incredibly attractive offer. Another key part of China's strategy is its policy of non-interference. When Chinese officials and business leaders come to negotiate, they don't bring up sensitive topics like human rights, democracy, or governance. Their focus is purely on the economic deal. They'll do business with just about any government, no questions asked. This makes the relationship feel less complicated and more respectful to some African leaders who are often tired of being lectured by Western powers about how to run their own countries. China presents itself as a partner for development, not a moral judge, which can be a refreshing change of pace. However, this approach isn't without its critics. Some worry that the massive loans could become debt traps, leaving African countries beholden to Beijing if they can't pay them back. Others point out that these big projects don't always create as many local jobs as promised, especially when Chinese labor is brought in. And the lack of focus on governance means that sometimes these deals can fuel corruption rather than solve it. But for now, the visual evidence of China's impact is powerful. When you can drive on a new road or fly out of a new airport built by China, it's hard to argue with that kind of progress. Now, let's look at how the United States is trying to compete. America's approach is like that friend who doesn't want to help you move your couch, but is very excited to talk to you about investing in a startup. The US has recently shifted its strategy away from traditional foreign aid and towards a more transactional, business-first mindset. The new motto, especially under the Trump administration, is deals, not aid. The idea is to counter China not by matching its massive state-funded projects, but by promoting American companies and private investment. The US government is essentially trying to be a matchmaker between Wall Street and Africa. The main tools for this are agencies like the US Development Finance Corporation, or DFC, and the Export-Import Bank. These institutions are authorized to provide tens of billions of dollars in loans and risk insurance to help American companies invest in places they might otherwise see as too risky. The US is telling African nations, "We don't just want to give you a fish, we want to teach you to fish," by partnering with our world-class fishing companies, of course. This approach emphasizes creating a healthy business environment, promoting transparency, and building sustainable private sector-led growth, which sounds great in theory. But here's the catch. The American system is slow, very slow. While China can approve a billion-dollar project in a few months, getting a US-backed deal through involves navigating a maze of bureaucracy, regulations, and risk assessments. American companies are naturally cautious and want to see a clear path to profitability before they invest their own money. The US government can offer support, but it can't force a private company to take a risk. This means that while US officials are giving great speeches about the power of American business, the actual flow of money and projects onto the continent is often just a trickle compared to China's fire hose. This has led to a major perception gap. The US talks a big game about being a better partner, often criticizing China for its lending practices and lack of transparency. Officials in Washington hold hearings with serious titles like China's malign influence in Africa and warn about the dangers of Chinese technology and debt. However, from an African perspective, it can feel like a lot of talk and not enough action. They hear the warnings, but they also see the roads and hospitals China is building. The US is promising a high-quality, long-term partnership. But for many African nations facing urgent needs, China is offering a solution right now. To really understand the difference between the US and China, let's look at some real-world examples. Think about critical minerals, the stuff you need for batteries, like cobalt and lithium. China has gone on a shopping spree. Since the pandemic ended, it has been buying up mines across the continent. In late 2023, a Chinese company bought a massive copper mine in Botswana for nearly $2 billion. In 2024, China pledged up to $7 billion for new mining infrastructure in the Democratic Republic of Congo. China is playing a long game, securing the raw materials it needs to dominate the green energy industry for decades to come. This strategy is direct and effective. China identifies a resource it needs, and its state-backed companies move in with enormous amounts of capital to acquire it. The deals are often opaque, negotiated at the highest levels of government, and focused purely on extraction. The goal is to get the raw materials out of the ground and onto ships headed for China as efficiently as possible. This provides a huge cash injection for the African host country, but it also raises questions about whether the nation is getting the best value for its precious natural resources in the long run. Now, let's look at the US response. Instead of buying mines directly, the US is trying to support strategic infrastructure projects that can help American and allied companies compete. A great example is the Lobito Corridor. This is a massive railway project backed by President Biden in late 2024, designed to connect the resource-rich regions of the DRC and Zambia to a port in Angola. The idea is to create an alternative route for minerals to get to the global market, one that isn't controlled by China. The US is also promoting American tech companies like Cobalt Metals. which uses artificial intelligence to discover new mineral deposits. The US approach is more about building an ecosystem for private business. It's less about direct state control and more about creating the conditions for Western companies to succeed. The Lobito Corridor project, for example, is a partnership between African governments, the US, and the European Union. It's a complex, multi-layered initiative that aims to foster regional trade and investment beyond just mining. It's a grand vision, but it's also slower and more complicated to pull off than China's direct acquisitions. It's the difference between buying the whole grocery store and trying to build a new road so more people can go shopping there. Let's check the polls. So with these two giants offering very different deals, who is winning the hearts and minds of the African people? For a long time, the United States held the top spot as the most popular foreign power. But the tide is turning. According to a major 2024-2025 survey by Afrobarometer, a respected research network, China has now pulled ahead. For the first time, China's favorability rating in Africa, sitting at 60%, has surpassed that of the US, which is now at 53%. This is a huge deal. It shows that China's strategy of delivering visible projects is paying off in public opinion. When you dig into the reasons why, it's not hard to see the story. Many African leaders and citizens see China's engagement as simple and effective. You ask for a bridge, you get a bridge. There's less bureaucracy and fewer political strings attached. The US, on the other hand, is often seen as slow and complicated. Its promises of investment can take years to materialize, if they ever do. While the US talks about values, China delivers concrete and steel. For people who need jobs and better infrastructure today, the choice can seem obvious. China is seen as a partner that listens to their needs and acts quickly. Of course, this doesn't mean Africans are naive about China. The same surveys show that people are also concerned about the debt that comes with Chinese loans and the impact on local jobs and the environment. There's a growing awareness of the potential downsides, but the positive perception is driven by the tangible benefits they can see and use every day. An ordinary person might not care about geopolitical strategy, but they definitely care about the new highway that cuts their commute time in half or the new power plant that keeps the lights on. Meanwhile, the US image has been hurt by a perceived lack of consistent engagement and a hot and cold foreign policy. The shift to a deals-focused approach under the Trump administration, which included cuts to humanitarian programs and talk of closing embassies, sent a message that the US was less interested in a genuine partnership. While the US still has a lot of soft power, people love American movies, music, and technology. Its reputation as a reliable government partner has taken a hit. In the competition for influence, being present and delivering results matters, and right now China is often seen as doing a better job of both. For the 54 countries in Africa, this competition between the US and China is honestly a bit like being the most popular kid in school who suddenly has two wealthy people fighting to take them to prom. It's a fantastic position to be in, but, it's also incredibly tricky. The biggest opportunity here is the power of choice. For the first time in a long time, African nations don't have to accept a take-it-or-leave-it offer from just a single Western power. They can now shop around. If one country's terms are, say, too strict or the interest rate on a loan is too high, they can just go across the street and see what the other is offering. This creates leverage. And really, this leverage allows African leaders to negotiate better deals for themselves. They can play the US and China off each other to secure more favorable terms, more investment, and more support for their own national development plans. A country might secure a loan from China to build a port, while at the same time partnering with a US company to manage the logistics. This best of both worlds approach allows them to build their infrastructure with Chinese speed while potentially incorporating American technology and management skills. It's a strategic balancing act that, if done right, could, honestly, accelerate economic growth across the continent. However, walking this tightrope is full of dangers. The most obvious risk is getting caught in the middle of the rivalry. What happens if Washington or Beijing decides you're getting a little too friendly with the other side? There's a real fear of retaliation. A country might lose access to favorable loans, face trade tariffs, or get cut out of important diplomatic initiatives for choosing the wrong partner on a particular issue. This pressure can be immense, especially for smaller, more vulnerable nations that rely heavily on foreign investment and aid. The competition could easily spill over into their domestic politics, creating instability. Furthermore, there's the risk of becoming overly dependent on either power. The debt trap argument against China is a serious concern for many. If a country takes on too much debt, it could be forced to hand over control of strategic assets like ports or mines if it can't pay. On the other hand, an over-reliance on the US private sector could leave a country's development plans at the mercy of market fluctuations and corporate priorities, which, honestly, can change overnight. The challenge for African nations is to use this competition to their advantage without losing control of their own economic destiny in the process. As African nations become more confident on the world stage, their demands are also evolving. They are no longer content with simply selling off their raw materials for a quick paycheck. The new mantra across the continent is value addition. African leaders and citizens are now asking a very important question. Why should we export raw cobalt for a few dollars when we can export batteries for a few $100s? They want to move up the value chain. This means processing their own resources, manufacturing their own goods, and creating higher-skilled, better-paying jobs for their own people. This is a direct challenge to the old economic model, where Africa was just a source of cheap commodities for factories in Europe, America, and now Asia. Take the DRC and Zambia, which together produce over 70% of the world's cobalt. They are now working together to demand that new investments include building local processing plants and battery manufacturing facilities. They don't just want to be a mine, they want to be part of the entire green energy revolution from the ground up. This is a fundamental shift in thinking, moving from exploitation to industrialization. This demand for value addition is where the US and China's competition gets really interesting. China's model has historically been focused on extraction, but they are slowly starting to respond to these new demands by investing in some local processing. The US, with its focus on private sector partnership, is well positioned to help with technology transfer and building sophisticated manufacturing plants. The country that can best help Africa build its own industries, not just dig up its resources, will have a major advantage in the decades to come. This is the new benchmark for a successful partnership. Ultimately, what Africans want is economic sovereignty. They want partnerships that treat them as equals and contribute to building sustainable, diversified economies. They want their young, educated populations to have opportunities at home, so they don't have to search for them abroad. The competition between the US and China provides the leverage to make these demands, but it will be up to African leaders to negotiate deals that truly benefit their people for the long term. The goal is no longer just to get a good price for their resources, but to use those resources to build a better future. While the spotlight is often on the heavyweight match between the United States and China, it's important to remember that, honestly, they aren't the only ones interested in Africa. The party is getting more and more crowded, and that's great news for the continent. A host of other countries are stepping up their engagement, creating a multipolar landscape where African nations have more options than ever before. This diversification of partners is a key strategy for avoiding overdependence on either Washington or Beijing, and for finding partners that might be a better fit for specific needs. The European Union, as a collective and through its individual member states like France and Germany, remains a massive trade and investment partner. The EU is pushing its own global gateway strategy as an alternative to China's Belt and Road, promising high-quality, sustainable investments. Then you have other rising powers making their own moves. Turkey has dramatically expanded its diplomatic and commercial footprint across the continent, building everything from airports to mosques. India is leveraging its historical and cultural ties, promoting itself as a partner that understands the challenges of a developing nation. Even countries like Japan and South Korea are becoming more active. Japan has long focused on promoting high-quality infrastructure and technical cooperation through its TICAD process. South Korea is using its cultural soft power and technological expertise to build relationships. These countries may not have the deep pockets of China or the military might of the US, but they offer specialized expertise, different financing models, and partnerships with fewer geopolitical strings attached. They add more flavors to the buffet of options available to African leaders. This crowded field is, honestly, the ultimate safety net for Africa. It reinforces the continent's agency and bargaining power. If a deal with China feels too risky and a deal with the US is too slow, perhaps a partnership with Japan or the EU is just right. This allows African countries to create a patchwork of relationships, tailored to their specific goals. They can work with China on a railway, the EU on a green energy project, India on digital technology, and the US on healthcare initiatives. This complex web of diplomacy ensures that Africa will not be dominated by any single power, allowing it to forge a more independent path forward. So, where does this leave us? We're witnessing a historic moment. The intense competition between the United States and China has turned Africa into a premier stage for 21st century geopolitics. But this isn't a story about Africa being a passive victim or a pawn in a great power game. Instead, it's a story about the continent's rising influence and its quest to define its own destiny. The dueling offers from Washington and Beijing have created a marketplace of opportunities, empowering African nations to demand more from their international partners than ever before. The future that Africans are fighting for is clear. It's not about choosing a side between the US and China. It's about choosing what is best for their own people. They want partnerships that create jobs, not just for a few years while a project is being built, but sustainable, long-term employment. They want to see their raw materials turned into finished products on their own soil, capturing more value and building real industrial capacity. They want technology and skills to be transferred so they can innovate and solve their own problems. Essentially, they want to move from being a continent of potential to a continent of prosperity. The challenge ahead is immense. African leaders must be savvy negotiators, clear-eyed about the risks, and united in their demands. They need to build strong, transparent institutions to ensure that the benefits of these massive investments are shared by all, not just a small elite. They must navigate the intense pressure from global powers without sacrificing their sovereignty. It requires a delicate balance of pragmatism and vision, of securing short-term gains while building a foundation for long-term, independent growth. It's a monumental task, but the continent is more prepared for it than ever before. In the end, the winner of the US-China rivalry in Africa won't be decided in Washington or Beijing. It will be decided by which country proves to be the most effective and respectful partner in helping Africa achieve its own goals. The ultimate prize isn't control over resources or strategic influence. It's a chance to be part of the most exciting growth story of the 21st century. The continent is no longer just a battleground for others. It's the master of its own house, ready to welcome guests who are willing to respect the rules and help build a better home for everyone.